In the medieval world, war wasn't just destiny, it was duty. Every man owed his life to someone above him. A peasant owed his lord, a knight owed his king, and the king owed his god. This system had a name, though no one dared to speak it aloud: the blood tax. Under feudal law, every farmer, blacksmith, and boy who could hold a blade was part of an invisible economy, one that measured loyalty not in coins, but in corpses. When the banners were raised, entire villages emptied. Men marched under the promise of honor, while the lords who sent them counted their deaths like interest on a loan. For the few who survived, there was no reward, only scars and silence. The wealth they created was never theirs to keep, and yet, generation after generation, they returned to the battlefield, convinced that sacrifice itself was sacred. But what if war was never about faith, nor courage, nor destiny, but simply about profit? Today we uncover how kings, popes, and merchants built their fortunes from the blood of men who never had a choice. If you love exploring the dark truths and hidden economies of the medieval world, hit the like button, subscribe to Medieval Crazy History, and tell us from which city or country you're watching. Now, let's step into a world where blood was currency and loyalty was debt. Long before nations existed, before armies marched under banners, there was a simple promise: the oath of loyalty. It was spoken in Latin, sealed with blood, and it could never be broken. A man was born owing his life to another, the peasant to the knight to the Lord to the king, and the king, they said, to God himself. This was feudalism, a pyramid built not from stone, but from obedience. Every man's place was defined by his duty to fight, to serve, or to die. Protection was the reward, but it was a reward that often cost more than it gave. When war came, and war always came, the summons spread across the land like a storm. Messengers rode through villages with the royal seal, calling every able-bodied man to arms. The peasants dropped their tools, kissed their wives goodbye, and followed their lords to battlefields they would never return from. The lords called it loyalty, the church called it honor, but the peasants knew better. It was debt. They paid it not with coins, but with their sons. For 40 days each year, a knight was required to fight for his king without pay. After that, his loyalty came with a price. If the war dragged on, and it always did, the king owed him silver. It was the earliest form of military contract, the beginning of a business hidden behind the illusion of duty. And in this economy of death, not all blood was valued the same. The death of a noble could shift kingdoms. The death of a peasant barely rippled the surface, but together they kept the wheel of power turning. Every time a king demanded men, the land suffered. Fields went untended, families starved, and villages disappeared. Yet the nobles returned from war richer than before, bringing home loot, land, and slaves from conquered lands. Victory was measured not by peace, but by profit. To fight for your lord was to buy your right to live under him. To refuse was treason, a crime punishable by mutilation or death. And even when the peasants were forced into battle, they were expected to arm themselves, sharpening plows into spears, turning hammers into weapons. They were soldiers without armor, debts without names. For the lords, war was both a duty and an opportunity. Every campaign was a chance to expand territory, claim ransoms, or seize new estates. When a noble captured another on the battlefield, the reward could be enormous. A single ransom might equal a lifetime of peasant labor. To the victors, blood was a commodity. To the vanquished, it was currency spent too soon, and the church sanctified it all. Priests blessed armies before battle, promising divine reward for those who died for God and king. In truth, they were blessing a transaction, one where the poor paid in bodies and the powerful collected interest. By the 12th century, this unspoken system had spread across Europe. Every oath, every banner, every campaign was another line in a ledger written in red. The peasant who fell in mud, the knight who died in armor, the king who claimed victory, all were part of the same economy of faith and fear. The feudal debt was eternal. It could not be escaped, only inherited. And with every generation, the balance grew, until entire nations owed their existence to the blood of those who never saw the gold. War had always been a duty, but by the 12th century, it became something far more dangerous, a career. The world was changing. Kings no longer trusted loyalty, they wanted results. And in a time where land was power, and power demanded endless conflict, there arose a new kind of soldier, one who fought not for God or honor, but for coin, the mercenary. He was a man without a flag, a sword for sale, a ghost who owed nothing to anyone. He would swear allegiance to whichever lord paid the most, then turn against him when the offer changed. In his eyes, loyalty was just another weapon, to be wielded, sold, or discarded. Mercenaries appeared everywhere: Italy, France, Germany, England, drifting like vultures from battlefield to battlefield. They were born from poverty, from desperation, from the endless wars that never ended. Some were veterans of old Crusades, others were thieves, deserters, or exiled knights. Together they formed companies so feared that cities paid them not to fight, but simply to leave. They called themselves free companies, a cruel irony. They were free only from mercy. The most infamous of them all was the Great Company, a vast army of hired swords that roamed 14th century Italy. Led by men like Werner von Urslingen and Fra Moriale, they burned, looted, and ransomed entire towns. Their motto was carved into legend: enemy of God, of pity, and of mercy. For them, war was business, and business was good. A single siege could make a captain rich for life. Ransoms, pillage, protection money, all flowed into their coffers. And while peasants bled and kings prayed, the mercenaries built their own kingdoms of chaos. But gold came with blood. When a campaign ended and the soldiers were no longer paid, they didn't disappear. They became wolves. They turned on villages, burned monasteries, and hunted travelers. Entire regions fell to famine and ruin, not because of enemies, but because of allies who had run out of work. Governments tried to stop them. Some were executed, others bribed, but most simply disappeared into the next war. Because war was always waiting. There was always another king to fight for, another rebellion to crush, another fortune to earn in someone else's misery. And so a new truth was born. Peace was bad for business. Whenever treaties were signed, whenever battles stopped, the mercenaries starved, and so they made sure the fighting never truly ended. If there was no war to be found, they created one. The church, too, learned to use them. During the Crusades, mercenaries fought beside holy knights, their swords baptized in the same blood. The promise of heaven meant little to them, but the pay was divine. They became the silent backbone of holy wars, killing for salvation they didn't believe in. The irony of the age was that those who fought for money often survived, while those who fought for faith were the first to die. Mercenaries didn't believe in glory, they believed in survival. And in a world where blood had a price, they were its best accountants. By the 15th century, entire nations depended on them. The Italian city-states turned warfare into a contract system, the condottieri. They signed deals, negotiated salaries, and treated battles like business meetings. Even kings grew jealous of their independence. Some, like the mercenary-turned-prince Francesco Sforza, rose so high that they became nobility themselves. The age of the professional killer had arrived, and with it came a simple, eternal rule. In war, the only true winner was the one who got paid. In the Middle Ages, God had an army, and it was always recruiting. The church, draped in gold and incense, preached peace from the altar, but built its empire through war. Every crusade, every holy expedition, every knight who rode with a cross on his chest, they were all paying the same tax: blood for salvation. War for the church was never just politics, it was business wrapped in divine law. The Pope didn't raise armies for conquest, not officially. He raised them to liberate souls, to cleanse the world of heresy, to save the faithful from eternal damnation. But every war fought in God's name filled the church's coffers faster than any offering ever could. When the First Crusade was called in 1095, entire nations moved at the Pope's command. Peasants abandoned their fields, knights mortgaged their lands, kings emptied their treasuries. They believed they were fighting for heaven, but what they really built was an industry. The church sold indulgences like war bonds, promising forgiveness for those who couldn't fight but could pay. Priests marched beside knights, blessing swords that would soon be red with blood. For every heretic burned, a donation was made. For every city conquered, a tithe was collected. And the greatest reward of all wasn't salvation, it was loot. When Jerusalem fell in 1099, Crusaders slaughtered men, women, and children until the streets ran with blood. Chroniclers said the victors waded ankle-deep through corpses, singing hymns as they looted gold from the dead. That night, the city of God became a marketplace of sin, but the church called it holy. Because when faith and profit collide, holiness becomes a matter of accounting. Across Europe, bishops blessed campaigns against pagans, Muslims, and even Christians who refused to obey Rome. Crusade became a sacred word, a brand that could justify anything. It was preached from pulpits, printed in decrees carved into banners. It turned murder into virtue, theft into sacrifice, and empire into devotion. The church also knew that war was good business, even after it ended. Monasteries owned the land abandoned by the dead. Pilgrims paid to visit holy sites made famous by blood. Relics of fallen crusaders were sold as sacred artifacts. Bits of armor, splinters of the true cross, sand from the Holy Land. The church had found a way to make profit eternal, and not all holy wars were fought far away. The Inquisition, the church's war against its own, turned confession into currency. Torture chambers filled with the screams of the accused, while inquisitors seized property and wealth in the name of purity. The blood of heretics paid for new cathedrals. Still, the faithful believed, because belief was the most powerful weapon of all. It needed no iron, no blade, no armor, only fear. By the 14th century, Europe itself was a battlefield of faith. Popes and kings fought not just for souls, but for supremacy, and for every victory won for Christendom, the spoils flowed upward into the vaults of Rome. The soldiers died, the priests prayed, the church prospered. It was the perfect circle, an endless exchange of death and redemption, sin and salvation, blood and gold. The medieval world bled for God, and God, it seemed, accepted payment in full. The battlefield was never the end. For most soldiers, it was only the beginning of another kind of war, the one fought inside their bodies, their minds, and their memories. When the fighting stopped, the bleeding didn't. Men crawled home with missing limbs, infected wounds, and eyes that no longer saw the world as it was. They carried pieces of the battlefield with them, metal in their flesh, fever in their veins, ghosts in their sleep. In the Middle Ages, to survive war was not to live. It was to endure, and even endurance had a price. The kings paid their armies in promises. Those promises rarely survived the journey home. Once the banners were lowered, the soldiers were forgotten, their contracts void, their wounds unpaid. The same rulers who raised them in glory now turned their faces away. The lucky ones found work as guards, caravan escorts, or mercenaries in another war. The unlucky became beggars, their scars a map of forgotten battles. In the cities they gathered under bridges and at cathedral doors, holding out hands that once held swords. Their armor rusted into rags, their valor into shame. But even misery had its merchants. The church opened hospitals for the wounded, sanctuaries funded by charity, which often meant the same nobles and priests who had sent those men to die. Inside those stone wards, monks tended the sick with prayers and herbs, but never for free. A donation could buy a cleaner bed. A larger one could buy forgiveness. Healing the body was just another way to heal the guilt of the rich. Disease was the greatest tax collector of them all. The plague, the fever, the wound rot, all spread faster than victory ever could. After every battle came famine. After famine came pestilence. And in every wave of death someone profited. Gravediggers charged double when the corpses piled up. Priests demanded payment to bury the fallen in consecrated ground. Candle makers sold wax by the pound to light the endless funerals. Even death became a marketplace, and the soldiers who didn't die from sickness faced another curse, memory. They had seen what others could not imagine, bodies torn apart, comrades burned alive, children orphaned by the sword. In a world without the word for trauma, they called it haunting. The church told them to confess. The tavern offered them ale. Neither could wash the blood from their hands. Some turned violent, others silent. A few wandered from village to village telling stories for food. The first historians of war paid in pity and bread. But among them were also men who discovered that survival itself could be profitable. They sold trophies from battle, armor, weapons, banners. Relics of carnage turned into souvenirs. Some became recruiters, selling dreams of glory to the next generation of fools. They called it service, but it was the same debt, passed on like inheritance. And always the wheel turned. The kings raised new armies. The peasants marched again. The merchants stocked their wagons with salt, grain, and bandages. Everyone had learned their role in the economy of suffering. The soldier's body was the currency, his pain, the investment, his survival, the interest. And even when he tried to leave war behind, war never left him. Because in the Middle Ages, peace was just the silence between debts. When men went to fight, Women stayed behind but war followed them home. The blood tax did not spare them, it simply changed its form. For every knight who fell, a wife became a widow, a mother lost a son, a daughter lost her dowry. The medieval world measured a woman's worth in alliances and heirs, but war broke both. It tore apart families, erased inheritances, and left countless women to rebuild lives from ashes. Some became the silent administrators of the fallen, keeping estates alive while their husbands rotted on distant battlefields. They took charge of lands, serfs, and debts, often with more intelligence than the men they replaced. Yet the law still called them temporary caretakers. Everything they ruled would be taken back once a male heir came of age. But not all women waited. Some became merchants of survival. In towns shattered by war, women sold bread, bandages, wine, and rumor, the things soldiers could not live without. Camp followers marched behind armies, nursing wounds by day and selling comfort by night. They were hated, blamed, and punished, but the truth is simple. Without them, the armies would have starved long before they ever reached the front. And then there were the women who learned to fight. Joan of Arc was not the first to raise a sword in God's name. She was simply the one who refused to lower it. Across Europe, noblewomen defended castles in the absence of their lords, commanded militias, and negotiated truces. Some led rebellions when taxes grew unbearable. Others ruled quietly through cunning and influence. But the church had no patience for female power. A woman with a weapon was a scandal, a woman with ambition, a threat. So they called them witches. They burned the healers who made potions for soldiers, the widows who spoke too boldly, the lovers who knew too much. In every pyre there was fear, not of sin, but of defiance. Yet war also made queens. While common women lost everything, royal women gained thrones through marriage, manipulation, or bloodline. Eleanor of Aquitaine rode with crusaders and outwitted kings. Isabella of France overthrew her husband, Edward II, and ruled through her son. They played the same brutal game as men, and sometimes they won. But even queens paid the blood tax. Their bodies were political treaties, their children collateral for peace. When kings failed on the battlefield, their wives carried the shame in public. When wars dragged on, they sold their jewels to feed armies and their tears to calm the crowd. Every coronation hid a funeral, and for the countless women who were neither noble nor famous, war meant hunger, fear, and silence. When armies marched, villages burned. Soldiers took food, livestock, and whatever else they wanted. They took daughters too. The chronicles rarely wrote their names, but the ruins of their lives filled the spaces between every victory. Still, even in ruin, they endured. They buried the dead. They raised the next generation of men who would one day march off to fight and die for another cause, and in that cruel cycle, their grief became the foundation of nations. History called them the weak, but they were the ones who rebuilt what war destroyed. Power in the Middle Ages was never inherited. It was bought with lives, with faith, with gold. Every king who wore a crown had paid for it long before his coronation. He bought loyalty with titles, silence with land, and fear with fire. Behind every royal victory stood a trail of corpses, peasants, knights, servants, and priests, all reduced to ash in the furnace of ambition. Castles glittered, not with glory, but with guilt. Every stone carried a debt, every wall a name carved in forgotten blood. The treasury overflowed, but the kingdom starved. The peasants worked harder. The merchants raised their prices. The church demanded tithes. The rich feasted in candlelight, and the poor vanished into the dark. The price of power was not just paid in war, it was paid every day in peace. Because peace in the medieval world was only a pause between conquests. The kings called it stability. The peasants called it starvation. Taxes climbed higher after every campaign. Gold was needed to rebuild cities, to pay debts, to fund the next holy cause. Even the air seemed taxed, the right to breathe under a banner that wasn't yours. And yet, the illusion of greatness endured. Minstrels sang of honor and divine justice. Chronicles praised their kings as chosen by God. But the truth was simpler. Power was the most expensive lie ever told. Some rulers understood this, and it broke them. King Henry IV wept in the snow before a pope to save his throne. King John signed away his crown's authority to buy peace with his own people. Others refused to learn. They bled their kingdoms dry, chasing immortality through endless war. Even the church, that eternal power, learned the price of its own greed. When the coffers overflowed and the cathedrals reached toward heaven, the people began to look up, not in awe, but in anger. By the late Middle Ages, rebellion was no longer unthinkable. The same peasants who once carried swords for their lords now carried torches to their gates. Faith cracked, authority trembled. The blood tax had reached its limit. In the 14th century, Europe groaned under the weight of plague, poverty, and pride. The Black Death killed half the continent, and with it the illusion of divine protection. Kings died, priests fled, and the survivors began to question the order of all things. If God had abandoned them, what good was loyalty to kings? The blood that had built empires now became the ink that wrote revolutions. The same roads that once carried crusaders now carried rebels. The same forges that made swords now made printing presses. And with every word written, power lost a little of its mystery. By the end of the Middle Ages, Europe was no longer a feudal world of obedience. It was a marketplace of new ideas, a storm about to break. But the legacy of those centuries never disappeared. The kings may have changed their crowns, the popes their robes, the soldiers their weapons, but the blood tax, in one form or another, never stopped being collected. For in every era, someone always pays, and it is rarely the one who gives the order. And so, the Middle Ages ended as it had begun, not with peace, but with exhaustion. The kings still wore their crowns, the church still rang its bells, and the peasants still bowed their heads. But the world had changed. The soil beneath Europe was soaked with centuries of blood, and no sermon or song could wash it clean. Every sword forged had left another grave, every victory carved another scar into the earth, and every coin that glittered in the hand of a nobleman was, in truth, a relic of someone else's suffering. The soldiers who paid the price have long turned to dust. The popes, the princes, the knights, the widows, all gone. But the memory remains. Because the blood tax was never just history, it was the foundation of everything that came after. The birth of nations, the collapse of kingdoms, the rise of greed disguised as glory. When we look back on the Middle Ages, we often see castles and crowns, saints and swords. But maybe we should see something simpler: the cost of every dream built on someone else's death. If you enjoyed this journey into the darker side of history, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which medieval mystery or madness you want to explore next. Your curiosity keeps this channel alive, and history, no matter how grim, deserves to be remembered.